and go Paolo for this UFC Roundtable. We're not quite sure if this will be a regular thing, but we're just gonna give it a go. So first off, how are you guys doing?
No, I'm doing well, Nick. How are you? How are you, Daniel?
Doing
Doing pretty
awesome,
good.
man. Thanks for having me on, Nick.
No problem, and really excited to chat about a bunch of UFC related topics, and including tonight's UFC Fight Night 68. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. So first off, let's just go back to last week and talk about Carlos Condit's performance against Thiago Alves. Of course, he picked up a TKO win in the main event of UFC Fight Night 67. Uh, he went into enemy territory and picked up a fairly dominant win and got back into the win column finally. He was out with a really bad knee injury when his knee popped against Tyron Woodley just over a year ago. So it's definitely good to see the natural-born killer back in the winning column, and really, he does have a case, not for a title shot, but definitely close to it. So first off, Paolo, what are your thoughts on Carlos Condit's performance?
I thought Condit looked well. I'm a big Carlos Condit fan, so it's hard for me to temper what I have to say. But I was impressed by his performance, but I think it's a little bit overblown sometimes too, because the first round went as I thought it would. I mean, because he was coming back from a long layoff, he was a bit tentative, and then he was sort of not able to find his range. Then Alves was sort of picking him up a bit, kicking him and stuff like that. And then second round came and he caught Alves with a big shot, and that was the beginning of the end. So now I'm wondering what if he never caught Alves with that big shot? Would he be able to continue getting back in his groove? But overall, he looks good. He looks good, but there's been title talks that he should fight, Rory Mack or the Lolly winner. As much as I would like to see that as a Carlos Condit fan, I think maybe one more fight, maybe a rematch with Woodley or so. But overall, yeah, I'd say it's a pretty good performance.
And Daniel, your thoughts on his performance?
Whenever you talk about Carlos Condit, you're literally talking about one of the most exciting fighters, and not just UFC history, but MMA history. He goes in there every single time, and he has about 29 or 30 victories, and 28 of those 38 victories are via finish. So, he went in there and he had a slow start like he usually does. Thiago Alves landed all those big leg kicks. Carlos Condit ate them, showed his heart, and he landed that big elbow. And man, he destroyed Thiago Alves. And it's interesting because when I was watching the fight, I had to rewind it 10 times to see what he hit him with. But then once I saw that elbow, man, just beautiful placement, a beautiful technique, and the natural-born killer is back.
Yeah, for sure. And personally, I think he should fight the winner of Matt Brown versus Tim Means. Obviously, Matt Brown was supposed to fight Nate Diaz, and definitely a fight, even if Nate Diaz pulled off the upset against Matt Brown, a fight between Condit and Diaz would be just as good. But Carlos Condit versus Matt Brown is a fight many people, everyone I'll just say, have been wanting for a long time. It has been scheduled, and then it's been called off due to injury or whatever. And so Matt Brown versus Tim Means, it's an intriguing fight. I wouldn't be shocked to see Means pull off the upset, but I am picking Brown in that fight. The thing with that though is Means. He's also a very, very exciting fighter, and Carlos Condit versus Tim Means, although it's only a little, it's not as intriguing as the Brown Condit fight, but it's up there. Would you agree, Daniel?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there would be a little bit of a backstory because Tim Means, he does train at Greg Jackson. Carlos Condit trains at Greg Jackson, so there'd be a little bit of a rivalry going on there. But obviously, the fight that the fans want to see is Carlos Condit versus Matt Brown.
And the Paolo, I know you don't think he should get a title shot. I don't think really anyone should, other than huge natural-born killer fans. But what you like that Carlos Condit Matt Brown matchup first off, and you think that will happen?
Yeah, I mean, come on, how can you not be excited for that fight? I mean, those two guys are definitely going to stand and trade. I doubt anyone will try to take each other down. Maybe, I don't know, maybe someone wants to mix it up and do it. But, and because it's been scheduled already, there's even more reason for it to happen. But if Matt Brown is coming off a loss, I don't think it's going to happen because, that would have been his third straight loss, and then he would have lost to Means, who I'm thinking is going to be an underdog. And Means versus Condit is going to be an exciting fight, but like right maybe means. I mean, but right now Means doesn't really have that name value yet. But maybe when he beats Matt Brown and he beats him impressively, I think Means and Condit would still be a really good fight.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So, as far as the UFC Fight Night 67 card, it was a Brazilian card. It did live up to my expectations just because I don't expect too much from Brazilian Fight Nights going into the card. Just because often you count in Brazilian judging and it doesn't always make for a great night of fights. But one thing that stood out for me was the co-main event. Charles Oliveira picked up a third-round submission win over Nick Lentz. And so first off, what were your thoughts on the fight? It earned Fight of the Night honors. Paolo?
Oh, yeah, no, it's a great fight, and it definitely went not according to how I saw it. I thought it would be just like the first fight where they would go straight to the ground and they would exchange positions. It'd be like a grappling clinic, like the first round was. I mean, like the first fight was. I thought the first fight, Lentz even caught Oliveira in a guillotine, I thought. And I was like, whoa, like he could sub Oliveira, and that's a pretty big thing if he did. But they actually changed the script. They actually just stood and traded with each other. And Nick Lentz actually did a lot better than I thought he would. I thought that if Oliveira kept the fight standing, he would just polish Nick Lentz off and beat him up, but he actually held his own. So yeah, it was a pretty good fight. And I had it tied 1 round apiece going into the third, and I was worried that Oliveira was going to lose that fight if they kept going, but he pulled it off, a standing guillotine choke. Great fight through and through, great finish.
Daniel?
It's very rare that we see a series of fights and the first one wins Fight of the Night and then the second one wins Fight of the Night. I can recall Dan Henderson versus Shogun, but both Nick Lentz and Charles Oliveira fights, they both won Fight of the Night. And I kind of felt like Charles Oliveira was kind of playing with him a little bit. He ate every single shot that Nick Lentz threw at him. And in the past, we've seen Oliveira not necessarily have chin issues, but maybe he has a little bit of a mental issue. Like you remember that delayed reaction when Cub Swanson hit him? It took a couple seconds and then he fell down. But, against Nick Lentz, he literally ate his shots and he was playing with Nick Lentz a little bit, and then he got the finish in the third round. So I'm very impressed with Charles do Bronx Oliveira, and I'd like to see him face a top 10 opponent next.
So opponent-wise, what do you think is next for him? I know a fight that many want to see is a Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira, which could develop. I know Max Holloway is already a top 5 fighter, but if Oliveira was able to pick up a win over the Hawaiian, he'll also become a top 5 fighter. Do you like that fight, Paolo?
Oh yeah, I really like that fight, but the fight that I really want to see is Chad Mendes. I know I get a lot of flack for suggesting that fight on Twitter because people are like, oh, no way, Chad Mendes is going to eat Oliveira and stuff. But I think Oliveira's a really good chance to beat Chad Mendes. I mean, Oliveira's really polished his striking, and Chad Mendes is, and he has a reach advantage. And if it's anything that Chad Mendes is weak to, he's weaker to fighters who can keep the fight standing and pick him apart from range, and I think Oliveira could do that. I mean, he's definitely going to be a huge underdog going to that fight. Don't get me wrong, but I think he's going to be a lot better than how some people think. My reasoning is I just don't want to see either Holloway or Oliveira lose at this point. Like, I think that's 2 really good contenders that we shouldn't lose.
One fight that I actually really want to see is Chad Mendes versus Max Holloway, and the thing is, I suggested this after Max Holloway defeated Cub Swanson in amazing fashion just a couple months back, but Max Holloway, lots of people don't want this fight because they look at it as if Chad Mendes would go out and dominate Max Holloway, and because Holloway's still developing, he's only 23 years old, I believe, and like he's not even in his prime yet, and he is a top 5 featherweight, and featherweight is a very, very stacked division, where the thing is, Max Holloway, he has showed that he is a very good fighter. He is a top 5 fighter. And yeah, maybe Mendes would dominate him. I don't think Mendes would dominate him. I would pick Money Mendes to take the win, but I do think it would be a closer fight than some think. But also, sure, of course, Holloway's young and everything, but he showed that he needs a big step up in competition. He's only a couple fights away, maybe even one from a title shot. So Mendes just seems like a very obvious opponent. What are your thoughts on Holloway and Mendes, Daniel?
That's actually the fight that I've been calling for. You know, like you guys mentioned, Oliveira versus Holloway, that'd be a really fun fight for the fans. It'd be great. But I think at this point, Max Holloway, he's earned that top 3 opponent. You know, he goes in there against Cub Swanson, and he takes out the number 5 guy in impressive fashion. So, you know, from here on out, he's earned that top 3 opponent. He already beat, well, it was a split decision loss, but in my opinion, I thought he beat Dennis Bermudez. So I think the next logical step is Chad Mendes, and then let the winner get a title shot.
For sure, and like Paolo pointed out, Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway are both young prospects, even though they have a number of fights in the UFC. But they are, like, you can't call them prospects because they are both top 10 fighters, and in Holloway's case, top 5 fighter. But they're still very young, and that would be getting rid of a possible future title challenger. And so moving on from UFC Fight Night 67, just recently announced that Daniel Cormier, the new UFC light heavyweight champion, he defeated Rumble Johnson via submission just last month to gain the vacant 205-pound belt. Although Ryan Bader stirred some things up at the post-fight press conference, they almost got into a little bit of a brawl. They had to be separated by security at the 187 press conference. But the UFC announced that Alexander Gustafsson, who's coming off a knockout loss to Rumble, who just lost to Cormier, will be getting a title shot. No date or venue or event has been announced, but I would expect that fight to happen probably in September, so UFC 191 would make sense. So first off, how surprised were you by this fight, and did you think that Cormier versus Bader was going to happen, Paolo?
I'm a little, well, at first I was a bit surprised that it was going to be Gustafsson, because I know that a lot of fighters get, like, I think there's a stat that there's been over like 30-something fighters that have received a title shot off of a loss. But I mean, Gustafsson got knocked out, and he got knocked out pretty badly. Like, Rumble was beating the paint off his face when he lost. But you know, it was only between Gustafsson and Bader, and at first I thought Bader would get it because, you know, he stirred up some drama with Cormier, and, you know, there's already that added storyline to it. But I think this is more so like they're getting ready for Jones to come back. And the thing if Gustafsson and Cormier happens, then it's gonna set up a rematch between Cormier and Jones, or Gustafsson and Jones. And I think either one of those is I think either one of those would be better than Bader and Jones, because, you know, I don't think anyone would really give Bader much of a shot against Jones. I mean, not a lot of people even give him a shot against Cormier for one, but I think that's the main reason.
And Daniel?
Yeah, you know, when you talk about Ryan Bader, yeah, for sure he's earned the shot. He is on that streak. But when you talk about what's a more competitive fight, Alexander Gustafsson versus Daniel Cormier is the more competitive fight. And not only in terms of how the odds makers would have opened the lines. You know, I'm pretty sure Daniel Cormier would have been minus 600 against Ryan Bader, and he's only about minus 220 against Alexander Gustafsson, but also in terms of the matchup, how the styles match up. Ryan Bader, he basically does what DC does, but he does it 10 times worse. You know, he's a wrestler with a big overhand right, but DC is a lot better than him. And then you got Alexander Gustafsson. He's got the range, he's got the height, he's got the footwork, he's got the striking, and I'm going to say he's got some really good MMA grappling. He went in there against John Jones, stuffed all his takedowns, and took him down twice. So in my opinion, despite him coming off a loss, I think Alexander Gustafsson is going to put on a good fight against Daniel Cormier.
I agree with you in a sense that Gustafsson is the more competitive fight against Cormier. I probably will be picking DC to retain his title, but a Gustafsson pick would not surprise me at all. And I might, closer to the fight when it happens, closer to when it happens, I might consider Gustafsson because he is the underdog. And if I was betting on it, I'd definitely lay down a little bit of money at least on the challenger, because he did give Jones the most difficult fight of Jones's career, and that says a lot. Despite he didn't win, that does say a lot. But the thing is, I just don't see how it makes sense when the UFC awards a guy that got knocked out by the guy that just lost to the champ and then got injured. He was supposed to fight Glover Teixeira this month in Berlin, and then he got hurt. It was a back injury or whatever. and now he's getting a title shot because he got knocked out and then got injured. So that's kind of like saying, of course it's different, but so I can go into the octagon, get knocked out by Anthony Rumble Johnson, because I know I would. So then I'd be fighting Daniel Cormier for the title after that. Not a chance. Of course, I didn't give Jones the best fight of his career either. But you get what I'm saying. Like how can you give Gustafsson a title shot coming off a loss, and he's like 1-2 in his last 3. The only win he's had for a couple of years is against Jimmy Manua, who I don't even think is in the top 10. So, like, I'm not going to go as far as saying I'm offended by this, but Ryan Bader, you got to feel sorry for him. He's riding a 4-fight winning streak. Maybe not the best fights, maybe not the most entertaining fights, but he got W in all 4 of them. So, like, I don't know. It's just going to be interesting. Like, the thing is, where I like this matchup is because I do think Gustafsson will give Cormier a way better fight than Bader, but it's just kind of showing that they're, like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's just going to be interesting to see what happens, and the division isn't looking too good without Jones. We know that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially if you think of that, probably the top 5, top 6 guys in the division right now are guys that Jones just beat. So it's definitely going to be hard to sell right now, because regardless who's the champion, except if it's Rumble, if it's Cormier, if it's Gustafsson, if it's Bader, everyone's just going to be like, all these guys just lost to John Jones. They're all just paper champions, as they say.
One fight that I'd like to see, since Bader isn't getting a title shot, is a Rashad Evans versus Ryan Bader. And Evans, he actually said that he'll be returning hopefully in September, and that's when I think Cormier versus Gustafsson will happen. So I think a fight between Ryan Bader and Rashad Evans could possibly be on the main card of that pay-per-view, assuming Gustafsson-Cormier will be a pay-per-view headliner. And that would line things up nicely, assuming John Jones isn't coming back that soon. Then you could do the winner of that versus the champ. Would you agree, Daniel?
Yeah, for sure. Anytime you talk about a guy like Rashad Evans, future UFC Hall of Famer, and if Bader is able to get the victory over him, that's only going to propel him upwards to a title shot. So I think if Bader is able to get the victory over Rashad Evans, then he'll probably have a very solid case for a UFC title shot.
So let's just quickly touch on the middleweight title fight that was announced. Of course, there isn't a date or a location attached to it quite yet, but Chris Weidman, the middleweight title holder, will be taking on Luke Rockhold for the championship in his next outing, and we all of us expected this fight to happen. The only other contender that could have gotten the title shot was Jacare Souza, but most people were expecting Rockhold to get the title shot. So first off, this fight will be one heck of a fight. I'm just going to call it right now. It's not going to end early, and it's going to be a very, very fun fight. So first off, who do you like in this one, Paolo?
Oh, that's tough. At this point, I'm probably going to go with Weidman right now. Because when I haven't done as much research yet, I mean, I know both fighters well, but just the way their styles match, Weidman. Yeah, I'll just go with Weidman right now. Over the course of the fight, over the course of research, like when I'm starting to do more watching and noticing a little bit more things, I might switch to Rockhold. But right now, I'm just going to go with Weidman. That strong wrestling base, he's got a chin that's tough as crap, and he's got really heavy hands. Nobody could drop Anderson Silva, and he dropped him with a grazing punch. So Weidman's really tough.
Either way, I do think this will be Weidman's toughest fight of his career, even if he does win or lose. And Daniel, who are you liking in this one so far?
I'm liking the champion, Chris Weidman. I think that he might be a little bit more well-rounded than Luke Rockhold, and that's funny to say because Luke Rockhold is one of the most well-rounded guys in the UFC. But the areas of concern with Luke Rockhold, obviously his ground game is very high level, but if you recall, Chris Weidman, he did a pure jiu-jitsu match with Andre Galvao, who, he's a better grappler than Luke Rockhold, let's face it. And Chris Weidman didn't get tapped out. He went all the way to the end with Andre Galvao. And then obviously on the feet, he's no spring chicken there either. He knocked out Anderson Silva. He outpointed Lyoto Machida on the feet. And, obviously Luke Rockhold just beat up Lyoto Machida. But if you recall, while they were on the feet, Luke wasn't really looking that good. He was just looking incredible when he took it to the ground. But I don't think he's going to be able to full mount Chris Weidman or anything like that. I think Chris Weidman's going to set up his strikes. He's going to take him down. He's going to avoid the subs. And I think he's going to remain the champion. Like right now.
Yeah, I'm actually the minority in this fight for here. I do think Luke Rockhold will get it done. I think he is the new UFC middleweight champion whenever they will fight. And I just think he really is probably better everywhere. But it will be a competitive fight, I do think. And I'm looking forward to it. So moving on from those two title fights, we're just going to quickly touch on this, not too much, but the new UFC drug testing policy was recently announced, and lots of fighters are looking at this as a very, very good step and for the UFC, because obviously there's been lots and lots of fighters testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs, and the sport really has to be cleaned up. So first off, I'll just quickly go through a little bit of the details. So they're working with the USADA, and they're going to be testing every single fighter year-round randomly without giving the fighters notice, possibly 5 to 6 times per year, and that's all out of competition. That's not counting in competition, which is 6 hours prior to the weigh-ins and 6 hours after the fight. And so they'll also be tested for that, and these tests will also include blood tests, urine tests, and some other tests. So it's looking very, very good. I'm just hoping that they will be able to do what they're saying they will. And so first off, Paolo, what are your thoughts on just the new policy?
Ooh, wow. I think what happened was, I really hate to do this, but I'm going to reference a Drake song to this. Went 0 to 100 real quick. That's what happened, right? I think this is sort of like a knee-jerk reaction from the UFC right now. And they're like, especially because they're getting a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of these big-name fighters getting popped for PEDs. And so what the UFC wants to do is they want to show everyone that, you know what, we're a serious sport, we're a serious organization. We're not going to allow all this cheating that's going to happen. So we're going to set all these ridiculous penalties, and maybe it's going to be a better deterrent for fighters. I mean, whether or not it works, or whether or not it gets implemented, like, who knows? I mean, who knows? I mean, is Brazil still going to improve? Because the Fight Night 67 fighters didn't they just say none of them got tested?
Yeah, Alves and Condit were not tested, I don't think, at all, which is crazy. And so Daniel, your thoughts?
Yeah, for the PEDs, the performance-enhancing drugs, I actually think it's great for the sport because this isn't golf. You're not hitting a ball into a hole. This isn't baseball. You're not hitting a ball with a stick. This isn't basketball. You're not throwing a ball into a basket. You're hitting each other in the face and trying to make the other guy go unconscious. So if you're taking steroids, you can literally kill a man, and that's not what you want to happen inside the UFC. This is a competition. This is a sport. And we don't want to see, serious injuries. We want to see people play on a level playing field. So, in my opinion, it's great that they kick out the steroid users. Give them 4 years, give them 5 years, let them get out of here. It's just when you talk about the recreational drugs, that's when I kind of have a problem with it, because some of these guys, the guys that live in California, they do have medicinal marijuana cards. That means they're prescribed by their doctor and they're able to take it, like guys like Nick Diaz. So I don't think guys like that should be penalized. I do applaud the UFC for they changed it to only in competition. Yeah, they took out the out of competition. So I applaud them for that. And the steroid part is great. Kick out all those juice heads. But there do need to be a couple adjustments here and there. But overall, I think it's a great start.
Yeah, for sure. And penalty-wise, for just testing positive for PEDs or whatnot, you can actually be suspended. The new policy says that you can be suspended for up to 2 years on your first offense, and then it just gradually gets higher of a suspension the more times you test positive. So it's looking good for the sport, and I think this was very, very needed for the UFC just because so many guys are testing positive. Like guys like the greatest of all time, Anderson Silva, was tested positive. How does the UFC let that fly? So let's just move on from that. Let's quickly, UFC Fight Night 68 takes place tonight from the Smoothie King Center in New Orleans, Louisiana, and is headlined by a middleweight matchup between Tim the Barbarian Bosch and the MMA legend Dan Hendo Henderson. So first off, let's just go through the main card. Kicking things off will be a bantamweight fight between Francisco Rivera and Alex Caceres. Paolo, who are you liking in this one?
Oh, sorry, sir. Where was that? I think cut off a bit.
Rivera versus Caceres, the first fight in the main card. Who do you like?
Bruce Leroy. Yeah. I'm liking Rivera in this one. But honestly, this whole card, I could flip flop with either one of them, and I'm not really gonna know. But I'm gonna like Rivera because Caceres, despite the fact that he's such a long, rangy fighter, he still gets tagged a lot in his fights. Like I think in every single one of his fights, he's either been dropped or like put on rollerblades at some point. And the thing with Rivera is this guy is arguably the hardest hitter in the division. Like he like I think most of his fights that he's won at 135, he knocked the guy clean off, except for one fight, and that was his first fight at 135. But yeah, I'm liking Rivera for this one. I think he eventually catches Caceres and knocks him out. But if Caceres subs him on the ground, that's not going to surprise me either. But my pick's going to be Rivera by knockout early.
And Daniel?
It's a great fight because with Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres, you got the long range, you got the submission skills, and he's got a lot of experience in the street fighting scene too. So he's been around the block. He's got a lot of heart. And with Francisco Rivera, obviously he's one of the more dynamic strikers in that weight class, even though Takeya Mizugaki dropped him, but let's forget about that for a second. And, Francisco Rivera, he hits super hard, and if he connects on Bruce Leroy, like many people have been able to do already, he could for sure knock him out. It's just if you're betting on a guy like Francisco Rivera, you got to be careful because he could get tapped out, and Bruce Leroy is very good at tapping people out, and it's going to be a really good fight. It's a coin flip, in my opinion, like Paolo said, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy it as a fan.
Yeah, definitely. And like Paolo mentioned, I actually read that this is the overall card actually has the closest betting odds for the first time in 3 years, I believe. So that's pretty crazy. That's just showing how close these fights are. I personally like Rivera in this fight. I do think it will go the distance, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a finish from either fighter. Obviously, Caceres most likely with a submission, and then Rivera with that knockout. But so Joe Soto is set to take on Anthony Burchak, another 135-pound bout. Who are you liking in this one, Daniel?
I really think this could be fight of the night. It's one of those cases where Anthony Burchak, he's extremely dynamic. He throws flying knees, big punches, and he'll go for big takedowns too. He'll slam you, and he's very dominant. He's very aggressive. He's always trying to win the fight. The only issue with Anthony Burchak is that he has these little lapses in his fights where he'll have someone in full mount and he'll be pounding them away, and then out of nowhere he'll get flattened out on his stomach and just give up position like it's nothing. And when you talk about a guy like Joe Soto, he's extremely opportunistic. So if he finds the sub in there, he's going to take it home and tap out Anthony Burchak. So I could see it going either way. I think if Anthony Burchak wants to win, he has to fight the perfect fight and not get caught, whereas Joe Soto, he's super opportunistic. So it's a toss-up for me, leaning a little bit towards Burchak, but I could totally see Joe Soto capitalizing on an opening and putting Anthony Burchak to sleep.
Paolo?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Daniel nailed on. It's like almost contrast of fighters that Joe Soto's he's a vet. He's a very level-headed vet. His level of competition has definitely been slightly better than Burchak's, and whereas Burchak's weakness is his very, like Daniel said, he's not always up there. Like I guess Ian Wet Whistle. Literally the only way Wet Whistle could have won was if he catches him in a heel hook. And what does Burchak do? He takes him down. He avoids a heel hook, and what does he do? He takes him down again and gets caught the second time. It's like, oh, you didn't catch me the first time. Here's my leg again. So it definitely depends where Burchak's head is at, and at this point, I really don't know. But yeah, I'm also leaning Burchak a little bit. But if Soto puts on a clinic and finishes him at some point, then it's not going to be surprising either.
You guys basically said it. I do think if Burchak shows up, he does probably have a bit of an advantage in this fight. But I am picking Joe Soto via decision. I'm not sure if Burchak will fully show up. I do think he will show up a bit more than against Ian Entwistle in his debut. I don't think he's going to be toe holded or whatever the hell happened in that first fight with Entwistle just last December. But I do like Soto in this fight, and I do think this has a good case for fight of the night. I do think it will go to a decision, but I do think the former title challenger, believe it or not, we can call Joe Soto that, will pick up a win, his first inside the octagon. Now, Thiago Tavares is set to take on Brian Ortega. Ortega is coming off he tested positive for steroids in his last fights against Mike De La Torre at UFC on Fox 12 last July. And Thiago Tavares is coming off a very, very big submission win. So, Paolo, who are you liking in this one? I know Ortega is at plus money, and I've seen a lot of people placing bets on Ortega in this fight.
Yeah, I like Ortega for this. I think Ortega might be one of the most popular underdogs I've seen for this card. The reason being is that Tavares, as I've seen many people say, and from what I've noticed, he does not have the best chin there is. Like, literally, like, if you get knocked out by grapplers, then you definitely have no chin. And you know, Ortega, he's a grappler. I mean, his striking game is very unpolished. I mean, but he's a young guy, so you never really know how fast he's progressing. I mean, who knows? He could go out there and just totally knock Tavares out in 10 seconds, you know. And that's the reason why I'm gonna pick Ortega. And as far as grappling goes, I think it'll sort of cancel each other out. I still favor Tavares better in the grappling because I think he's slightly stronger. He's got a bit of a better wrestling. But it's not like Ortega is going to get manhandled on the ground either. I mean, if it goes to the ground, Ortega still has a good chance to catch Tavares or at least be competitive. But if it stays standing, then I definitely favor Ortega, despite the fact that Tavares is probably the better striker. It's just I just can't side with a guy who's such questionable chin. And a lot of people are going to say, oh, Ortega is coming off the PEDs. He's not going to be the same fighter. I don't think so, because I think the PEDs he used were for weight cutting. So, and I think that was his first time dropping a weight class. I'm not so sure about that. But, yeah, it was a weight cutting steroid. It wasn't like one of those crazy steroids that he used. So, and Tavares himself, was on PEDs not too recently, too. A lot of people seem to forget about that. And he's been injured a lot. So there's just way too many of these little factors in there that just makes me stay away from Tavares. So I'm just going to go with Ortega on this one.
I don't see Tavares getting knocked out in 10 seconds, but Daniel, who do you have here?
You know, Paolo hit it on the head because, yeah, a lot of people are questioning Ortega because he's coming off the PED suspension, but it's not like he was taking TRT or something that makes him more jacked. I mean, the guy was taking a weight-cutting steroid. So, you know, when you saw him at the weigh-ins, it's not like he looked deflated like Vitor Belfort or something like that. I mean, he still looked great. The kid's 24 years old, and Brian Ortega is a super high-level black belt. There's a video, I actually posted it, of him rolling with Rener Gracie on the ground, and it's absolutely phenomenal. I know it's an exhibition match, but one doesn't simply hang with Rener Gracie on the ground, and that's exactly what he was doing. You know, he trains at a Black House, lots of great fighters there. Anderson the Spider Silva, you might have heard of him. And, you know, I think that Brian Ortega is getting better every single day. And, you know, we've seen Thiago Tavares, not only have we seen him get knocked out, but we've seen him lose to fellow grapplers. The kind of fights that he usually wins are against strikers, and Ortega is a very high-level black belt. So I'm going with the underdog here, Brian Ortega.
Are you guys placing bets on Ortega? Because you both are picking him.
I am.
Paolo?
He's actually my only bet when it comes to like picking fighters. He's my only fighter bet.
Well, I'm in the minority here again. I'm picking Tavares via submission. Not gonna break it down, but yeah, that's my pick. So, Dustin Poirier, his second fight at lightweight in the UFC, I believe. He is set to take on Yancy Medeiros, and this fight has Fight of the Night written all over it. I said the same thing with Joe Soto versus Burchak, but if both these fights go to a decision, Poirier versus Medeiros is going to get it. It's going to be one heck of a fight unless it is stopped early. So, Daniel, who do you like in this one?
You know, I like Dustin Poirier, and I agree with you. This could be Fight of the Night. You know, my prediction was Soto versus Burchak, but you know, I do this podcast, Flying with Best Fight Picks, and my co-host, Flying Brian, he actually picked Poirier versus Medeiros to be the fight of the night. And it's a great fight. You know, both guys, they stand and bang. Medeiros, he has more of a long, rangy style. He'll throw spinning back kicks, and then he'll just tee off on you if you're hurt. And Poirier is super well-rounded. You know, ever since he went up to 155 pounds, the weight cut hasn't been affecting him as much. And he basically looked like a world champion kickboxer against Diego Ferreira. So I'm going with Dustin Poirier here. And at the weigh-ins, as soon as Yancy Medeiros missed weight, I jumped all over the minus 170 line on Dustin Poirier. I put 2 units on it, and now he's minus 240. So, you know, we'll see what happens tonight. But I got Dustin Poirier.
And Paolo?
Yeah, I got Dustin Poirier too. I think I haven't seen much evidence of it yet, but I think moving up a weight like sort of solved his chin issues a bit. Well, we'll have to see yet because Medeiros can sort of hit pretty hard too. So if he drops Poirier, I'm not going to be too shocked. But you know, I think they're going to keep this fight standing for the most part, and I see Poirier finishing Medeiros early. And I'm going to have to disagree with this not being fight of the night because it's only going to last 1 round. We saw Arlovsky and Brown win fight of the night, and they only went 1 round. So if it's a back and forth fight that sees them basically like try to kill each other in there, I could see it winning fight of the night and a performance of the night for Dustin Poirier. So I'm gonna pick Poirier.
I like Poirier in this fight as well, but I don't see it being stopped. I do think hard shots are going to be landed, but I just don't think Medeiros is going to go to sleep or Poirier, on the other hand, being submitted. Those are the most likely options, really, for a finish, Poirier via TKO and then Medeiros via submission. But I do think this will be a very fun fight. I do think it will be a unanimous decision, but I don't think it's going to be like a dominant win for Poirier. I do think he'll get it done clearly, but I don't think it'll be a dominant win. And I do think Medeiros is a very good fighter. He's a prospect. He's an up-and-comer. And he could give Poirier a run for his money. So the co-main event, a heavyweight bout between 2 top 10, top 15 fighters, Matt the Meathead Mitrione versus Big Ben Rothwell. Daniel, who do you like in this one, and do you see a finish?
I like Matt Mitrione here, and for sure I could see a finish. You know, anytime the heavyweights get in there, there's a very good chance that someone's going down. And it's a cool matchup because Matt Mitrione, he's very mobile. He's on his feet. He great footwork, in and out, and he hits like a truck too. So, you know, Ben Rothwell, he's a stationary target, but he's got bricks for hands. So I can see Matt Mitrione landing his shots in and out, you know, potentially knocking out Rothwell. I know Rothwell's got an iron jaw, but he has been knocked out before. Or Rothwell can land that big shot when Mitrione's coming in and put him out cold. But I'm going to have to go with Matt Mitrione here. And it's funny because Mitrione's actually the older guy in terms of years, but in terms of fight years, he's definitely the younger guy. So, yeah, I'm going with Matt Mitrione here. I think he's going to be a little bit more athletic, a little bit more dynamic, and assuming that he took this fight seriously and he shows up, I think he's going to get the victory.
And Paolo?
Yep, in agreement with Daniel, but I'm going to go with Rothwell. And I'm not too confident on that pick. That's why I'm not betting this fight. But yeah, Mitrione is definitely the much faster fighter. They're both very strong, and they're both very tough. But the speed advantage from Mitrione and the athleticism advantage is huge. I can definitely see him, like Daniel said, just go in and out and just pick apart Rothwell for the whole fight. But if Rothwell is good for, at anything, it's eating everything that gets thrown at him. Well, everything except for like the guys who knocked him out at least. And then mount a comeback maybe in the second or third and just land one big punch and take the other guy out like what he did to Brendan Ver or Alistair Overeem. So, you know what? I'm just going to go with like a total gut pick on this and to think that Mitrione is going to dominate the first 2 rounds. But in the third, maybe he's going to make a mistake. He's going to like maybe have a bit of a brain fart at least, and Rothwell's going to capitalize and put him to sleep. But I think that there's a really good chance this fight goes to decision. And Mitrione himself mentioned on Ariel Helwani's podcast that he sees this going to a decision. So I think the over for this fight might be a good bet.
So Big Ben, he's not going to eat any punches tonight without getting dropped and knocked out because the Meathead is picking up a knockout win tonight. First round, I'm calling it here. So that's all I have for that fight. So the main event, Dan Hendo Henderson, I don't know why the hell he's still fighting, but he is, versus Tim the Barbarian Boshin. He's also on a decline. So two middleweights coming off losses, and this is going to be a hell of a fight if someone doesn't get knocked out early. So Paolo, who do you like in the main event?
I think it's gonna be a hell of a fight in a way that, well, in a way, this fight sort of reminds me of something like a fight from Bellator. You know what I mean? In a way, it's not. It's like a little bit of a crazy fight. I don't really want to say it's a circus fight because that's a little bit disrespectful to Hendo and to Boch. I mean, they're still quite competitive, but I mean, Boch is honestly like he hasn't looked impressive in any of his fights at all. Even the fights he won against like Brad Tavares, he was getting wrecked in that fight, and then he lands one punch and drops Tavares. That reminds me of how Shogun and Hendo went down the second time. Shogun was kicking Hendo around like a soccer ball, and then Hendo just throws a punch with his eyes closed and drops Shogun, who we know doesn't have the best chin these days because he got one punch KO'd by OSP. So I mean, this fight is, I don't know, this fight's hard to call. I could totally see a fight that gets really ugly, especially if it doesn't end soon. Like, I mean, Boch can get very tentative in his fights, and Hendo does Hendo like Diego does Diego. He's gonna walk in there, he's gonna plod towards Boch with his right hand all cocked in, ready to deliver the H-bomb. So, but at this point, I think Boch's chin versus Hendo's deteriorating chin could be the biggest factor. So I could see Hendo have success early on, but Boch eventually catches him and puts him away, maybe in the third or the fourth. And honestly, this could be a really ugly fight, or it could be a really exciting fight in a not so technical way. But I'm just gonna go with Boch on this one, maybe by knockout around the third or the fourth round.
And Daniel, who you liking?
You know, all week I've been saying Tim Boch inside the distance. He's 10 years younger, and even though he's lost a couple fights, he looked a lot better against Talis Latus. His footwork was way better, and you know he almost had him knocked out. And against Brad Tavares, yeah, he was getting pieced up the first round, but he did come back in the second and knocked him out too. And you know he's got a lot of heart to be able to do something like that. But last night I had an epiphany that Dan Henderson's gonna land the H-bomb. You know, so you know Dan Henderson's one of these guys that. He's a legend of the sport. He's one of the greatest of all time. He's gonna go down in the Hall of Fame, and you know he's walking into the octagon with a cane, literally. And you know I just can't say enough good things about Dan Henderson. So you know while if you're a gambling man, Tim Boch might be the smarter play. I am a gambling man, but I'm passing on this fight entirely. But you know what? I'm gonna change it up, man. I'm gonna go with Dan Henderson landing the signature H-bomb and putting Tim Boch out cold.
I saw someone on Twitter earlier today call it a Henderson grenade, and I was just thinking H-bomb is way better than Henderson grenade. But
Henderson grenade?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. But for the fight-wise, I like Tim Boch in this fight, but like probably every fan other than Tim Boch's parents, we all want to see
Henderson
the H-bomb get landed, but I don't think it will. I actually don't think this fight will be stopped. Like, it's a risky pick, unanimous decision, because Boch, he does have hard punches, and he could knock Henderson out because Henderson visibly doesn't have the chin he once had. But on the other hand, Boch is a very durable guy, but Dan Henderson can knock anybody out. So, in a way, it's intriguing because both these guys are on a decline, especially Hendo. I just hope they go swinging for the fences because they have nothing to lose. Boch gets knocked out by Dan Henderson, and that's just on his resume. To be able to fight Dan Henderson, that's like a positive in a way, other than the fact that he's 44 years old and got knocked out. But I like Boch in this fight. I do think he will. Henderson will look good early on, but how I look at Henderson and a few other guys. Like, I don't want to say this to their face, but I almost call it like old man syndrome. They just don't have the killer instinct anymore. They don't, like, they start to throw a punch, but they're just not able to follow through and land the punch. And then his chin is fading, and I don't know, it might be a rough night for Henderson, but if he does land that H-bomb, he got $50K going his way. So before we wrap this up, Daniel, where can our listeners, if anyone's listening, I'm not sure if anyone will be, but where can we find you on social media, and let us know all your betting and everything in that sort?
Yeah, First of all, thank you again for having me, Nick. And you guys can find me at Best Fight Picks on Twitter, at MMA Thought on Twitter, and at DFL on Drums on Twitter. Or just go to bestfightpicks.com. You know, I post my plays for every single card. And check out my new podcast, Flying with Best Fight Picks.
And Paolo, where can we find you on Twitter, Facebook? What's that website called that?
Vendetta Fighter.
No, existed when I wasn't even born. That social media website. Oh shit, what's it called?
MySpace.
Oh yeah, where can we find you on MySpace? Because that's very important nowadays in 2015.
Well, MySpace. Well, I'm not on MySpace, unfortunately. I am on Facebook.
Get on that. Get on that. What are you doing?
Yeah, at Paolo MMA on Twitter, like that's my name itself. Don't wear it out. Vendetta Fight, and then I write articles for Vendetta Fighter. I cover the fight previews usually for the main cards or all of the cards. I mean, all the entire card for the big fights. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Nick. Nice seeing you, Daniel.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to have you guys on the show, and we got to do this again. I know at the start I said not sure if this is going to be a regular thing, but I'm not sure if we're going to do this every week or anything, but we should definitely do it again. So for me, you can follow me on Twitter at NickUFC, and then you can follow my website's Twitter at MMA Junior written out _. So that's at MMA JUNIOR _. You can check out my website MMAjunior.co, not .com.co. Everyone messes that up. And I think that's about it. Obviously, check out my podcast. It's relatively new. I've had both these guys on to talk betting, and with Daniel, we talked about some up-and-comers. So episode 11 will be out this Wednesday. I actually have a big announcement, which will be on MMA Junior Radio this week, so make sure to check that out. And I think that's about it. So thanks again, you two, for coming on.